Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Adams from ProWritingAid, and we're joined today again by Graham Bartlett. Graham is a former detective with over 30 years of experience in the field as a firearms commander and city police chief. He is now a crime fiction and police advisor to over 80 crime writers and is also a best-selling crime author in his own right. Graham takes authors behind the curtain to show them how crimes are investigated and solved to help their manuscripts ooze authenticity. He was here on Tuesday to discuss crime scene management, police interviewing, and covert tactics, and now he's back to talk about common police mistakes made by crime writers and how to avoid them. He'll be here once more on Friday for a special hour-long Q&A, so you definitely won't want to miss that because you're going to just have so many questions for him by the time he's done today. So now I'm going to hand the session over to Graham, and I'll come back at the end. Take it away, Graham.
Michelle, thank you so much, and thank you to everybody who's joined us today from all across the world. I'm just looking at the some of the locations that you're in coming into the chat. It's quite daunting actually sitting here in near Brighton on the south coast of England, realising that I'm speaking to so many fabulous crime writers from across the world. So thank you ever so much. Thank you for those that joined yesterday and for the conversations that we've had during the course of the day on the Facebook group. Today, as Michelle said, we're going to be talking about common mistakes that crime writers make, not all of them, but some of them, and how to avoid them. Or put another way, Bartlett's bloopers is what I call them from time to time. So for those of you that weren't here yesterday, or just to reiterate what Michelle said there, I am why me? Why are you listening to me? Well, I'm a retired senior detective and I'm a writer, so I understand narrative. I understand the struggles that writers go through to make authenticity exciting and engaging. I work with about 80 authors and TV writers, and there's some names up there, some familiar names to you, I'm sure. And I'm also a crime writing tutor with the Professional Writing Academy, and I run a series of crime writing courses on how to achieve authentic crime, and you can find details of that on my website, which is policeadvisor.or.co.uk, but I'm sure you'll find ways of getting to that. Okay, so I probably don't need to tell you that good crime writing is not about all of the detail. So a lot of policing can be tedious, it can be boring, it can take time, and the excitement is probably 5 or 10% of the average working day. So as a crime writer, you want to make the tedious dramatic. You want to find the drama, find the excitement, find the jeopardy and tension within that tedium. Procedurally, it can also be quite dull, so you want to find the humanity in that, what it is about the procedure that drives your characters forward, that motivates them, that they struggle with, that they come up against, and stands in their way. It's authentic without being pedantic. If you ever hear me say realistic, then I've misspoken, because I talk about authenticity and credibility. Because if you're writing realistic crime fiction, you'd be writing a textbook, and no one wants to read a textbook of policing unless they're training to be a police officer. So it's authenticity without being pedantic, which is about showing the tip of the iceberg. You know, you can know lots. You know, if you attend my sessions this week, you will know an awful lot, but you definitely don't want to include all of that on the page. You need to know from that how to, you know, what to use, how to use it, and when to use it. I use an expression: you don't need to get it right, but don't get it wrong. Which sometimes I get strange looks for me. And what I mean with that is that you don't need to cover every detail of the procedure. You don't need to know exactly how to how a custody system works, how to put a prosecution file together, you know, how to forensically examine a house. But if you are going to delve into that detail, you can't get it wrong. So, you know, this is where you need to learn how you're going to what you're going to use and how. But the principles that I always apply are this: that the story is always king. It's always key. The story must come first, but it must also be credible. So you'll never hear me talk about, you know, throwing away a whole narrative because the procedure's wrong. It's about working the procedure into the narrative so that it can fly. Your characters must be plausible. You've got to be believable. I mean, they'll have traits. You want to make them interesting. I mean, a lot of police officers I know, probably some would say this about me, can be very dull. But you want interesting characters, but plausibility is really important there. Nobody wants an I Spy book of policing. I said that it's not about textbook stuff. It's about knowing the procedure, and then this next point, knowing where to take your poetic license from there. So if you know how something is done and you want to veer from that, you know the basis from which you're veering. So it's really important that you remember that. And this is really, really crucial. It's not rocket science, and there's always a way around things. I mean, I've had some really interesting challenges set me by authors who want certain things to happen, and because I'm, like any other former senior officer, former experienced officer, I know the system. I can kind of work through, well, actually, if we get this character to do that, or we put this character here, or we get them to say that, then what you want to happen will happen. So there's always a way around things, but sometimes you need to know the details to be able to find that way through. So some will say, does it really matter? Does any of this really matter at all? Well, who's going to notice if you get it wrong? Well, this is who'll notice if you get it wrong. Thousands of police officers, every lawyer, solicitor, barrister and judge that reads your books, all the court clerks, all the staff in defence firms and the prosecution firms, prosecution agencies, all who've previously worked in any of those above, and anyone who knows any of those, because they'll all talk to them about it. And of course, countless criminals. They will all know when you get things wrong. So I'm now going to go through some of the things that would never happen, and that's the nub of this. So some of the things that would never happen, and crucially, how to find a way around that. So I promised you last night a little bit about Line of Duty. This is all I'm going to say about Line of Duty. Line of Duty is an excellent UK drama, they tell me. But it's nothing to do with policing. It is to do with policing, but procedurally, I think they realise that it's not accurate. So here we have a very senior officer. You can tell he's a senior officer. His name's Ted Hastings because he's got a crown on his shoulder and he's got a gun in his hand. There is no way in the UK that an officer of that rank will be dressed like that with a gun in his hand. So that simply wouldn't happen at all in the UK. Here we've got a scene from Broadchurch, which is a UK drama based on the South Coast, and you can see in the background there we've got a dead body. Somebody's been pushed or fallen off a cliff. I won't give any spoilers on that in case anyone hasn't seen it. Yet all of these people here are within a stone's throw of that body. None of them are dressed correctly. None of them have got the right forensic barrier suits or anything like that. You've got a fight going on there. That's actually the boy's mum. And my PowerPoint has just crashed out, which happens sometimes. So Michelle and I were talking about technical problems earlier, and I've just had one, but I will get it back up. It's shouldn't take too long, so just bear with me a minute. Sorry about this. Just bear with me. Just need to share the screen properly. Talk amongst yourselves. I can see it now. I just need you to see it. Okay. Michelle, are you seeing the right screen there?
Yes, you're good.
Good. Okay. Sorry about that. So there we've got a murder scene basically being contaminated by police officers, detectives, and the victim's own mother there. And this is another one. Now that's Al Pacino shouting at somebody, Quite often you'll see in TV drama particularly, but also in books, quite a lot in books, police officers shouting at one another, bellowing, rowing, calling each other by their surnames, falling out, having huge... It's not like that at all. If you think of any workplace, because that's what a police station is, it's a workplace. People do get cross sometimes. People laugh and joke with each other. People have nicknames, and people work hard, and people do, you know, just get on as in any other workplace. So this notion of this being a, you know, very highly tense, almost kind of militaristic environment is just not the case. So, you know, try and avoid that if you can. Try and be more subtle with some of the tension between your characters than just people bellowing at one another. So we're going to go on to what I call the Bartlett's bloopers now. So the first one is this: murder detectives never have just one case running at a time. They could have half a dozen or more. In some countries, they could have a lot more than that. Some old, some new, each pulling them in a different direction. So that is really important, and you will want to focus your stories on a particular crime. You know, I get that completely. I write fiction as well, and I do that. But so many books that I review, so many authors that I advise, quite understandably, because they've never worked in the police, will try to just have their officers working on one case. Now, you're not going to want to clutter your whole story with lots of different murders happening, but if you have them being pulled in different directions, so they're attending a murder scene first thing on a Monday morning, 6 o'clock on a Monday morning, a body's been found, and they know they've got to be at court at 10 o'clock for the case that they were dealing with 6 months ago. Yeah, sorry, someone said you lost sight of the PowerPoint. That's because I've just unshared the screen at the moment, because otherwise you're just going to be looking at pictures all night, so which aren't very entertaining. So no, not at all, Erin. Just to say that you can have you can have your character pulled in all sorts of different directions without having to sort of go into it. But if you give the impression that, you know, they're going to deal with one case which could take them a year, and then they'll pick up another case after that, it's soon going to run out of of officers to deal with the murders. Okay, so next one is this. So DNA results are not instantaneous. With a lot of money and a fair win, the absolute minimum is 24 to 48 hours. Otherwise, think at least 72. So that one is quite important, because we often rely on DNA, and authors will rely on DNA to prove who the dead body is, and indeed to prove who the offender is, and they'll want to move things along quickly, and no one wants to kind of build in a 72-hour gap in their storyline while they're waiting for the DNA results to come back. But the simple fact is that the very science of comparing two fairly simple samples to the to each other takes time anyway. Add to that that you have the whole submission procedure, so you've got to recover the DNA first of all. It's got to be documented, it's got to be logged, it's got to be, someone's got to make sure that it's packaged properly, it's got to be taken to the lab. All of that takes time. Now, as I say, certainly in the UK, with a on a premium level, you can, if you're lucky, get a result back in 24 hours. So what's the answer to that? If you need your victim or your suspect identified quicker than that forensically, well, the answer to that is fingerprints. Fingerprints in a lot of countries now, I don't know about all countries, but certainly in the UK, and I'm sure in most other countries, fingerprints can be identified very, very quickly. There are databases that they can be compared against. If you're looking to identify your victim, you just need to find something with their fingerprint on that you know that they've touched, and compare it to the fingerprint of the body, and you can identify them very, very quickly. So sometimes it's worth thinking almost kind of old money and thinking about how would they have done it before DNA. And actually, because of the technology now that goes with fingerprints, you're certainly able to do that. If the DNA now is so sensitive that, and I talked about this last night, it's so sensitive that you can get DNA off almost anything that somebody's touched. But that takes a lot longer too, because first of all they have to work out whether there's any cellular material on that. So if somebody's say somebody's picked up a piece of wood or something, well, first of all you've got to swab all that wood and work out, do some tests to see whether there's any cellular material on there. And then once you've identified the cellular material, you then have to extract the DNA from that, and then you have to run the DNA, process the DNA, and then compare it again. So you can see that it can be quite a complicated process, even if you can get it to the lab fairly quickly. So if you're looking at, if you want a quick result, I would always say go for fingerprints. Okay, so next one is this. It's if your detective switches on or fiddles about with the suspect's computer, they're compromising all the evidence. Real cops leave it alone and call in the experts. Okay, so we've all seen it, and I've read it as well in books and on manuscripts that I've reviewed for people, where an officer will go in, they'll be searching an address and they'll see a computer and they'll start tapping away at the keys, and we'll try to find out what the computer was last used for, and how to how they can use that to prove the case. The general rule is that the computers are left in the state that they're in. So you don't start switching it off, obviously you have to unplug it, but you don't start switching it off. And you certainly don't switch it on. You don't start fiddling with the keys or anything like that. If you need anything urgent off there, then what would happen is you'd call out a forensic data analyst to come and extract that safely from the computer. So what happens is the computer is taken, and the same goes for phones. The only exception to that is with phones. If your officers are on a drugs raid, or they're part of they're searching a flat or a house or somewhere because of and there's an organised crime group, a gang involved, then what gangs will do is they will send what's known as a kill code to the phones in that house. So they'll know the police are in there, and they'll send kill codes to that, and basically those codes wipe the phone. So what officers will do is that they will they will turn those off. They might have to turn those off, or they'll put them into what's called a Faraday bag, which is basically a kind of I think it might be lead lined or something bag that blocks all the signals. So you put it in there, and those kill codes can't get through. So that's the thing with phones. With computers and other similar devices, what happens is the computers will go back to the lab, the digital forensics lab, and the staff there, the investigators there, they use forensically approved software to be able to download that hard drive onto another hard drive, a ghost hard drive. And the reason they do that is if you start fiddling around with the hard drive on the main computer, then you're changing all the data. You might not think you are, but you are. You're changing last accessed, and the forensic integrity of the data on that computer would be lost, or certainly called into question. So if you recover it properly in the way that I've just described, and you have you have it taken to the forensics lab, they will plug in this software, which then extracts it. It basically mirrors the hard drive onto a ghost hard drive in a forensically secure way. Your existing hard drive is untouched, and then the digital forensics officers work off the other hard drive, and that's when they will research it. And obviously, everything they do is audited and forensically secure. if your officer's gone in there and started tapping the keys before the forensic people have got involved, then you know, it's the equivalent of walking through a crime scene without a crime suit on. You know, you're in danger of destroying the evidence, or at least giving the defence an opportunity to call it into question. Okay. So the next one is this. So covert tactics are called that for a reason. Your murder detectives would not go undercover nor handle informants. That might differ in some countries, that second bit. They're specialist roles, and the tactics are not shared outside those who need to know. So, and there's old Jim, Jim's mate telling him he's going undercover for a couple of weeks. So, as I say, the tactics are called covert for a reason. And the reason that they are kept so quiet, so undercover, is for the safety of the officers themselves, the safety of the information they're getting, and the safety of the public. So, I mean, when I was in the police, we had a number of operations where I knew that we had undercover officers working on there, but I didn't know, and only because I was the most senior officer involved. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know what they looked like, where they came from. All I knew was that there were officers working in there, and I was being fed intelligence in a sanitized way, which would never identify who those people were, and it's all for everyone's safety. So where sometimes you read people walking into a briefing room where you've got the whole team being updated and discussing the case in an open forum and being introduced as the undercover officer, that simply wouldn't happen. It's very, very separate for the safety of the officer, the information, and the public themselves. So the same thing applies to informants as well. So certainly in the UK, you'd never ever hear anybody say, my informant told me this, my informant told me that. You know, it's all, informants are handled separately, and the information that comes from them is put through the mill in such a way that it comes out in a bit like with undercover officers, that you never know who provided that information. So rather than saying that you know, James Brown down the road dealt drugs to Peter Smith last week, and there's only a couple of people that would know that would be couched in terms that would make it far more difficult to know what the provenance of that is. So by all means have undercover officers and informants in there, but please try and keep conversations with them, or with their handlers more like, rather than them, with the senior people that are running the investigation, not with all and sundry, because that would fall outside the bounds of credibility. Okay, next one is, so by all means have your police officers leak information to the press, villains or private eyes, but remember, if they're caught, they're going to jail and no wrist slaps. But there's great suspense in them trying to get away with it, however. So this is another one where and this might be different in different countries, but certainly in the UK, the police would never work with private investigators on a murder investigation. It just wouldn't happen at all. They might have to get information from private investigators. So, for example, if there's a private investigator looking into a matrimonial issue, and the woman or the man ends up murdered, then they might need to go to the private investigator to find out what they knew about that, having been involved in investigating it prior to the incident. But they would never work alongside them. And it's, you know, it's very tempting. And, you know, as I say, it's great to have have a couple of rogue officers leaking information to the press, talking to villains or private investigators. You know, I'm not saying it never happens. It's not, you know, it doesn't fall outside the bounds of credibility there, but it's certainly something that if you're going to do it and other people are going to find out about it, then you need to there needs to be some consequences for that officer. Now, depending on whether they're a one of your main characters, or if they're just a minor character, would obviously depend on how much of a consequence you want to have around that. So, for example, if your main character is in the is sort of in the thrall of a local journalist, or is feeding a retired officer who now works as a private investigator with information, and you want your main character to stay in the job and out of prison, it's probably best that no one else finds out about that. If you have a minor character in a similar situation, then, and you want to, they don't really matter to the plot anymore, they've served their purpose, then you can just kind of deftly get rid of them by having them arrested or whatever for leaking the information. But certainly if they're found doing that, and again, my experience, having worked with officers that have ended up in prison for leaking information in this way, is where they end up, and they know they're going to end up there, because it kind of undermines the whole justice system. So I'm not saying don't do it, but either when it's happened, either keep it quiet, or you can you need to have some consequence to that, and it's sometimes that can be quite difficult if it is a main character, or a character that you want to bring into to the next book in your series. But there can be ways around it. An example might be that the evidence around that leaking of information might be flawed in some way, or the investigation into that that leaking of information might be flawed or inept, and the case might fall apart. Now, the person's still going to have a cloud hanging over them, but if the evidence doesn't stand up, and there's not enough to support either a disciplinary case or a criminal case, then your character might just have got away with it. But the key is to acknowledge the fact that it's wrong, it shouldn't happen, and move on from that in a way that's credible, but also supports your story, and hopefully your stories going forward. Okay. Next one then. Not sure I've shared the right screen there. Hold on a second. There we go. That should be the right screen. This is quite common, and I'm pretty sure it's the same in many other places. Although I'm open to I'm open to challenge on that. But promotions aren't given out for a job well done in the police. I usually say at this point, I got to a reasonably high rank in the police, and if they were given out for a job well done, I'd never have got anywhere near that rank. So sometimes, quite often actually, you read or you see on a TV drama that somebody's caught the bad guy, caught the serial killer, and off they've gone to go and get promoted. They've been made up to the next rank up, and everyone's clapping them and saying how marvelous they are. Certainly in the UK, there is the promotions are given out on the basis of yes, your operational competence comes into that, definitely, but also your leadership skills, your management skills, your conduct record. There's a whole host of things that come into play, and they're competitive procedures as well. So there's only a certain number of detective chief inspector ranks that are available. So a group will fight for those ranks, and they're awarded according to how well people perform in the procedure, and how how they perform, you know, how suited they are to that particular role. So that doesn't happen at all. The other side to that is that, and I've had this in some books that I've helped people on, is that the temptation to keep promoting your detective means that the further you promote them, the more you're going to the more you're removing them from the operational action. So you know, I've got a whole other kind of slide deck around who does what on a murder inquiry. But you know, a murder inquiry is usually run it might be different in other parts of the country, in other parts of the world, but certainly in the UK and in a lot of other countries, murder inquiries are run by reasonably senior officers. In the UK, it tends to be a detective chief inspector, rarely, but sometimes a detective superintendent, and you know, which is only 4 or 5 ranks up the ladder. You know, chief inspector is only four ranks up the ladder. So you have a situation where you've got this detective chief inspector who frankly isn't doing very much operationally anyway. They're running the whole inquiry in a very office-based way. They're not going out arresting criminals. They're not going out talking to witnesses. They're not going out searching houses, cars, fields, or anything like that. They're running the inquiry. It's a high pressure job. It's an important job, but they've got teams of people that are doing the exciting stuff. So you've got somebody that isn't going to be doing very much your reader's going to be interested in, and then you promote them to detective superintendent. My goodness me, they're now way away from the operational front line. And I tend to try and steer authors towards, you know, their central character could be a detective sergeant or a detective inspector. Then you'll probably get away with them being close to the action, and you'll probably get away with them being doing exciting things. Any more than that, and it really doesn't ring true. I sit here saying that as one of Peter James's police advisors, one of his 2 police advisors, and Peter James, of course, has a detective superintendent doing all the things that I've just said. But Peter James has been doing it for years, and it works well for him. But I would always say to him that that's not a job of a superintendent. But Peter James, you know, has got a great character there, and they're great books. And you know, why wouldn't he, basically? But I think if they're starting out, then having a realistic rank thing in there. Now, that doesn't mean that your officers can't get commended for doing well. There are all sorts of commendation levels. They can't get, you know, they can get congratulated. They can even, I know most countries don't have this, but in the UK, they can even get honours from you know, the monarch. You know, I've known officers get OBEs, MBEs for their work on inquiries, but they can't get promoted on the back of it. So it's just well worth remembering that and avoiding that temptation if you possibly can. Okay, so the next one, this is very important, this one. So police stations are not crime free. Although that £50 note you left on your desk will still be there when you come back from leave, milk teaspoons have a maximum life expectancy of about 2 hours. So there you go. I told you it was an ordinary workplace. And this is just to give you a little bit of reality and inject a bit of humour into the workplace, because they are workplaces. You know, you literally could, in a police station, because of the nature of the people there, you could leave a £50 note on the desk, go away for 2 weeks and come back, and I promise you it would still be there. Absolutely still be there. But you know, if you leave that pint of milk in the fridge, or you know, you leave your hat and someone else's hat's got dirty, you know, that's not going to be there very long at all. You know, stuff gets nicked in police stations. It really does. And you know, you know, that there's an expectation that it will be investigated, and that, you know, but you know, frankly, there, you know, things will go missing, and you know, if you can just introduce that into just introduce a bit of depth into into the, you know, into the police station, into the office where your team are working from. You know, that's, you know, you've got a milk thief about or something like that. It just, you know, it's never going to be a you know, a major plot line. Of course it's not, but it just adds that little bit of depth, the little bit of authenticity that you're going to, you know, you will tell your reader that you kind of understand what policing is about and you understand coppering. I mean, you know, there is, I mean, my son has recently joined the police, and he's already lost 2 torches. And he said to me, well, what, you know, I've lost my torches. I said, well, where'd you leave them? He said, well, I left them in the briefing room. I said, well, what do you expect? And he said, what do you mean? He said, it's a police station. I said, yeah. I said, everyone likes a torch, don't they? So, you know, best buy yourself another torch. So, you know, it's a life lesson for him. So that's that one. And this one, I think I might have touched on this one yesterday, but equally important to bring a bit of authenticity. It's not really a blooper, to be honest, but I like it anyway, so I'm going to talk about it. The police have their own internal penal code for minor misdemeanors, e.g. lateness, stupid comments, losing keys, etc. All fines are paid in donuts and enforced within 24 hours. And that I'd be amazed if that wasn't the same the world over, because it just seems to be the kind of barrack room punishment for everything. I remember when I was a sergeant on a team, and one of our officers phoned in. We were due to be we did start, well, most of us started work at 6 o'clock in the morning, and he phoned in at 6:15 and said, oh, you know, Sergeant, I'm so sorry I'm late, you know, I've just woken up, I've overslept. He said, I'll be in 20 minutes. I said, make that 40. And he said, well, no, I'll be in 20. Don't, no, I won't, you know, I'll be in. I said, no, make it 40, because I reckon from where you live to the bakery, it's going to take you another 20 minutes, and you've got 20 donuts to go and buy. So make yourself back here and be here in 40 minutes with the donuts. And that's just kind of the way it is. But I've seen, I mean, if you crash a police car, I'm not talking about sort of driving into a lamppost and hurting people, but if you crash a police car, you know, obviously there are going to be misconduct investigations around that. You might be criminally investigated for your driving. You know, if you know, there might be all sorts of things. But the team, your own team, will fine you donuts for that. And there's none of this kind of, oh, I'll get them after payday. None of that. Donuts within 24 hours is the rule of the game. So, you know, if you've got one of your characters doing something silly in it, then just chuck a tray of crispy Krems into the mix, and that'll soon sort them out. Okay, one other one which I haven't actually got a slide for, but I just want to cover briefly. And as I say, it's so difficult to cater for every country that's here, but I just want to talk about missing persons, missing people, and there's this notion that police will only take a report of a missing adult if they've been missing for 24 hours. That is certainly in the UK not only a myth, but it's also a dangerous myth. So we talk about in crime investigation the golden hour, and the golden hour is that it's more than an hour actually, but it's that immediate time after the discovery of an offence where you're going to recover the most evidence, find the witnesses, hopefully find the suspect. But it's really important that you act really quickly around that immediacy, that immediate time. So when a missing person goes missing, most of the time they have just gone missing, and you know, some adults go missing intentionally and want to go off and start a new life, and that's perfectly okay for them to do that, and they don't want their families told where they've gone or what's happened, and that's perfectly within their right to do that. So some go missing because they've got mental health problems, they're suicidal, etc. And some go missing because they've been killed. And you know, those last two categories, if the police aren't going to be looking for them for 24 hours, then they may well be dead in that time. Now, if you report a missing person to the police, you know, within a couple of hours of them not coming home, then I'm not saying that the police are going to rush out and kind of close down all the roads and send the helicopters up and do all of that, but they will at least have the opportunity to look at the information, look at the evidence, and risk assess it and work out whether or not they need to do anything in the here and now. But the issue really came home to me quite starkly one Saturday morning when I was the duty senior officer at Brighton, which was the city where I worked in most of my career. And the inspector came to me and said, this woman phoned up at 3 o'clock this morning and reported her daughter missing. She'd been out clubbing, and the night shift sort of said, well, don't worry about it, give us a ring if she's not back by 10. But the woman was quite insistent that her daughter wasn't the sort of person to not tell her when she was going, when she left the nightclub. There are lots of different people in the world, and some women will go on elsewhere. Some men will go on elsewhere. They will some will phone whoever they live with and tell them they're okay, and some won't, and who's to judge? But the person that knows them best is the person they live with. And this mum said no, she has gone off with other people before. She's gone around friends, and she always phones me. And there was just something about it that made this inspector and I think, do you know what, there is something here. We should be worried about this, because this is behaviour out of the ordinary. So we basically put in a train of inquiries to try and work out where she'd gone, where she was likely to have been, and cut a long story short, the inspector and his team found her on CCTV. Found her getting into a particular vehicle. This was right in the middle of the city centre, so we were able to track the CCTV, the vehicle through the CCTV, and eventually to an address just actually not far from the police station. So they said, well, what should we do? We think she's got in that address. I said, well, let's go in and have a look. And there are police powers in the UK where you can, if you think someone's in danger, you can break in and go and sort them out, go and find them rather. So they knocked on the front door, couldn't get in the front door. Officers went around the back, forced a window at the back, stepped in the window, and stepped on the dead body of this girl that had been missing. Now, I'm not saying for 1 minute that had that inquiry been picked up as when the girl's mum had phoned in, but she had been murdered since she left that nightclub, and if we'd have waited 24 hours to take that report, we would never have found the suspect who was actually hiding in the address when we got there. So it's a very, very real but stark reason for you. And this is why I always say it, because if you're taking one thing away from here, this is the one. Everything else has been about writing crime fiction. This is about saving lives. If anyone says to you, you've got to wait 24 hours, just tell them that story, and that should help them come to their senses, basically. Okay, so question time. I'm going to open it up to, I think Michelle is going to field the questions. I think we've got about 15 minutes for questions. I see there's 42 in the Q&A box, so I've got no doubt we won't get through any of those. But what I will say, and I'm sure Michelle will say as well, those that we don't get through, we've obviously got a Q&A session on Friday that we can pick others up there.
Yes, thank you so much. That was great, Graham. Let's go through some of these. We'll get through as many as we can. Let's start with this. How best to learn cop talk for authenticity? Certainly not television.
Well, certainly not television drama, but television, TV documentaries are so realistic. I say they're realistic, of course they're realistic, they're documentaries. I'm talking about the fly on the wall documentaries where they go and follow a team or a patrol or whatever. They're definitely worth watching. I don't mean one off, but watch a lot of them, and you start to get into some of the talk and some of the kind of vernacular that police officers will use. And we've got their own slang. I mean, I'm going back to Line of Duty, I'm afraid. But Line of Duty is renowned at the moment, and I don't watch it, but for all of the acronyms. Police do talk in acronyms, but not to a ridiculous degree. You've got to make yourself understood, particularly if you're with the public. So yeah, just get used to the conversations, you know, things like, you know, anything that's following a police investigation or police officers in real life, you'll soon pick it up. As I mentioned my son earlier, about 2 weeks after he came out of the police college and went to, or the virtual police college as it was, because it was all done on Zoom, and went to his police station, I knew he'd been in a police station, because just some of the things that he was saying. I mean, you know, you're looking for somebody, you're looking for a, you know, he said, oh yeah, we got sent to a job, you know, it was a break at a break at a garage, yeah, we did an area search, no trace. You know, that area search, no trace is what you say to the control room, but it becomes part of the language. Oh yeah, we did area search, no trace. You know, and he's now coming out with that. You know, and I just sit there chuckling to myself, thinking, yeah, you're becoming a cop here.
Okay, next question. A common scene in crime dramas is the next of kin identifying a body in a morgue. A medical examiner I talked with said this doesn't happen, at least in the United States. Medical examiners use fingerprints and other methods to ID bodies. Could you address victim identification and next of kin notification?
Yeah, okay. So it can happen. I mean, the thing with DNA and fingerprints is that it is, I mean, fingerprints is, I say, fairly quick. DNA does take a bit of time, and you want to get that person identified as quickly as possible. So for formal identification for the coroner, and I'm saying the coroner here. The coroner in the UK is different from the coroner in the States. The coroner in the UK is a judicial role that has the responsibility to oversee the investigation of deaths, and in the States, I know that it's more of a pathologist role. So for that level of scientific identification is required, but sometimes you do need someone to be able to say, yes, that's Jimmy Smith. But obviously you have to be very sensitive around that. You know, the body, you know, if someone's been shot in the face, then you're not going to do that. You know, if it's going to be too upsetting, then you would find other ways to address that. In terms of notifying next of kin, that's done as quickly as possible, and it tends to be done by either, so in a murder investigation, either by a sort of reasonably senior, so a sergeant or something like that, or a family liaison officer might do it. But it's done as quickly as possible. But it's always done on the basis of, we think, we think, do you know where so and so is? We found a body and we think it might be them. But you have to. I mean, in one of my books, Death Comes Knocking, I wrote a whole chapter around death messages, because there's a real knack to be able to be, because they know if you're knocking on the door and you're going to give a death message, they know what you're coming to say. You stand there and you can look as nonchalant as possible, but if you're knocking on the door at 3 in the morning and you're saying we're from the police, everybody's heart's in their mouth. So the sooner you can confirm that with them, the better, rather than keep them hanging. Conversely, if you're knocking on the door at 3 o'clock in the morning, you say it's the police, there's nothing to worry about. That's another kind of, you just get that out really quickly. But notification is done as quickly as possible, as sensitively as possible. 9 times out of 10 in person. It's only if that's impossible that it would be done any other way.
Okay, the next question. Given DNA is so ubiquitous, how do you rate a hands-on murder where DNA would not be used?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Given that DNA is so ubiquitous, how do you rate a hands-on murder where DNA would not be used?
I don't understand. How do I rate a hands-on murder where DNA would not be used?
How do you rate it?
How do you write if it's a hands-on murder, I'm not saying that DNA wouldn't be used. It's not your first point of contact in terms of identifying the people. The DNA will almost always be used. Sometimes it's of no value. So in a domestic murder, for example, the fact that the husband stabbed the wife and the husband's DNA is all over the knife, the kitchen knife that they both use, is not hugely relevant. But you'd still look for it. You'd still try and find it. You still identify it. But what you can do, you know, if that fingerprint or that DNA that you've got is in blood on the knife, then that starts to look a little bit different. So DNA will always be a factor. What I think what I was saying earlier was that, you know, to identify fast time, then I wouldn't use DNA, but it will become part of the investigation going forward.
Okay, the next question is something like too much DNA an effective countermeasure? I remember reading something where someone left so much different DNA that finding the one sample of the culprit was next to impossible.
Yeah, that's a real issue now. That really is. I mean, the DNA technique used here over in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same anywhere else, is called DNA 17, and it's so sensitive that it, you know, you rarely get a unless you're taking a blood sample from somebody, you rarely get a pure DNA sample. You know, if you know, I pick up this glass here, you know, you're probably, you know, you've got my DNA on there, but you've also probably got, you know, some of my family's DNA on there. So you'll quite often get mixed DNA, but the level of DNA will vary. So what the DNA analysis will do is it will come out and say, you know, say I'm the suspect. So they will come out and say there were three sources of DNA on that glass. One of them was from what they'll put it in terms of the chances of that of DNA A not being from Graham Bartlett is 1 billion to 1. The chances of, you know, DNA C being Judy Bartlett, who's my wife, you know, is 100,000 to 1. And all that's saying is that we've both touched that glass. So it's the same as I was saying last night with intelligence. You know, you kind of, with forensic evidence, it's layered. So you kind of, you know, you've got the DNA on the glass, but you've also got my fingerprint in blood on the door frame, and you know, you've got my footmark going out, you know, into the onto the patio out there, and it, you know, it's wet, and you know, all these things come together. But you quite often get mixed DNA. It's not, you know, you get great convictions still where there's mixed DNA, but DNA is all about the context and how it got there, not just the sample itself.
Okay, next question. Are genetic databases being used when DNA matches aren't definitive?
So I'm just trying to, so a generic database. Genetic database is being used. So it's possible to use them. I'm not sure what the legality of using them are, but the way things work, sort of, you know, there's two ways of applying DNA. One is as a, you know, as a kind of indicating factor. So if, you know, if you can do, you know, if you can do familial DNA through databases, then you know, and you get all the right permissions to do that, then, you know, you start to then build up the fact that, well, okay, the person who left this DNA is the, you know, the son or daughter, because you can tell sex from DNA, of these two people. So you know, you're starting to break that down, but then you always have to go and get confirmatory. Once you've identified them, you then have to get the criminal justice DNA, the proper DNA sample, the swab in the mouth, to confirm that. So anything else is just indicative rather than evidential.
Okay, next question. How realistic is it to have investigators from different agencies working together? Not two teams, but two individual investigators working side by side.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the nature of the investigation. So, you know, if you've got a murder that involves a military, you know, soldier or somebody in the Navy, then you're quite often, you know, you probably have somebody from the Royal Military Police or the equivalent in other parts of the world working alongside. There are joint investigations all the time in this country between the local force who have the responsibility for the murder investigation and the National Crime Agency. That they'll put somebody in there if there's serious and organised crime involved. Even organisations like the Health and Safety Executive will undertake joint investigations on corporate manslaughters with the police. So it's quite, I wouldn't say it happens all the time, but on the nature of the case, if there's a need for another agency to be working alongside the police, then they would do. But the police will always have primacy. So those agencies will always have a single senior investigating officer who will be a police officer, or in some places now an experienced non-police officer who's in charge of that investigation and accountable for that investigation, and everybody works to her or him.
Okay, next question. My character is an undercover officer, and I find it tricky writing about how he maintains contact with the rest of the team working on the case. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, so realistically, that would all be done through a contact officer. So all undercover officers have a contact officer who works in a kind of hybrid role between the covert the UC, the undercover officers themselves, and the investigator. Now, that contact officer will at most have direct contact with the senior investigating officer or their deputy, but they will be responsible for ensuring that the intelligence of that undercover officer comes through to the investigation in a usable form. So your undercover officer won't be sort of, you know, chinking glasses and sort of having chats with the other investigators on the team. That will all be done through the contact officer.
I think we have time for one more question. What happens to bodies that are never identified?
Okay, so if you've got a murder investigation that involves a body that's not identified, what one is very difficult to obviously, you know, prove the case, because you need to really know who it is, but it's not impossible. So in the UK, the post-mortem would be carried out on the body, and you know there would be huge inquiries going all over the place, all over the world, to try and identify who that person was, where they might have come from. So looking at missing persons records, not only in your own country but elsewhere, checking foreign DNA databases, all of that sort of thing. But if at the end of the day you still can't find out who it is, but you do know who your murderer is, they can still be charged with the murder. It's very difficult, it'll be quite a tricky trial, but you know, that could still happen, and the body would be buried in a grave somewhere close to where it is. There's one actually not far from where I live. There's a headless torso, and headless, handless, footless torso found in a forest not far from where I live, and this was about 15 years ago, and it's never been identified. There's never been anyone arrested for it either, but that body was exhumed about 5 years ago because they thought they'd be able to get some DNA from it. But you know, at the end of the day, that murder investigation definitely was a murder, was basically you know, had to be wrapped up, but it's still open for any other inquiries. But yeah, that's what happened to the body.
All right, thank you so much. We are out of time. We still have 50 questions left in our Q&A that we have not gotten to yet. So if you have time in your schedule on Friday, please come back for Graham's Q&A. It'll be a whole hour of just questions and answers so that you can get some of these questions answered, and he'll be in our Facebook group as well. So if you are a premium user, you will have access to the session. If you're not a premium user yet, you have a 40% off code that you can become one so that you can be here with us again on Friday. So thank you so much, Graham. That was so fascinating.
Thank you, everybody. And yeah, do hook up with me in the Facebook group or on Twitter or whatever, and we'll have a good chat as well. So great. Thank you ever so much, Michelle. Really good. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.